Short story short, no, absolutely not. You cannot beat Sonic 4 Episode 2 without Tails. The game forces you to use Tails lots of times. You stand no chance at all whatsoever. But that's why we're here, and today we're going to finish the whole game using Tails the least amount of times possible. So, let's start. I'm going to be playing this on mobile so I can screen record it. And as far as it goes for rules, there's not really any rules, really. Glitches are allowed, and I just have to avoid using Tails at all costs. So, let's start with Sylvania Castle. Also, I just want to say that after the first zone, I connected a controller to my phone because I think people don't like seeing console games being played on a mobile phone for a video. So now it looks like it's on a console, mostly. So let's start with Act 1 now. Quickly into the stage, I came across this part that demonstrated Sonic and Tails spin dashing on this spinning wheel. So I ran to get far from Tails, then ran to the wheel and spun it without Tails. So Tails was avoided there. And after that, I ended up going high up in the air to see this big wall. I got pretty far up into the air with this high slope, but even trying it over and over and dashing to the tip of the wall, I still couldn't get up there. So Tails was used one time here. After that, there was multiple spinning wheels that I could easily avoid having Tails spin dash on. So let's move on to the second act. Pretty early into the stage, I was forced to use Tails high up into the air, so Tails has been used 2 times so far. This part has nothing compared with Tails, but I just want to say, how did I stay in the water the whole time? Didn't get any air bubbles. The 5-second countdown was at 0, and I still got down clutch. Really clutch, even if I say so myself. Really dang clutch. Alright, so let's continue. After that, there was 2 routes I could take. The top route and the bottom route with water. So after staying in the water route for a while, I ended up seeing a demonstration of a Tails being used. So before I used Tails, I decided to choose the top route instead, just to stop me from using Tails and see if this would be a better route to take. And the top route thankfully fixed my problem, since there was not an instance where I needed to use Tails up there. From that point, there was no more use of Tails for this act, so let's move on. At some point, I was forced to use Tails for this Act 3, and I had to use the Ultra Spin Dash to crack open this wall. I had attempted to do everything I could, but nothing really seemed to work, so 3 times I've used Tails. I made sure to keep it on as long as possible, though. It might just make me use it again shortly after, so I want to keep it on to avoid it making me use it again. After I use this shield around Sonic, the icon has like a bubble, I guess, so yeah. I made sure to keep it on because of the spot these breakable walls I talked about earlier, there was 3 of them. And without using the Ultra Spin Dash, I was actually able to target the walls and destroy them. But I'm personally not actually sure if the shield was the reason. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't, though. But I don't know for sure, so let's continue. After that, there was a spinning set of stones. I was able to time it right to regular spin dash fast enough, then jump right as I was about to get near the end to ensure that I didn't fall. After that, the act was done. So now let's move on to the first boss. There was a few times where I was able to hit Eggman's machine, but at some point I was forced to use Tails and fly up into the air and hit Eggman. I was forced to use Tails 3 times, sadly, so the Tails count is currently 6. So, let's move on. Starting out with White Park Zone Act 1, different from other stages, we don't immediately have to use Tails for once. In fact, the majority of this level doesn't require Tails at all, but we do have to use Tails 2 times here, sadly. That's actually a decent amount compared to the other amount of times that we've had to use Tails in the past levels. Our total is currently 8, so let's keep going. White Park Act 2 was the last stage I ever got to when I was about 7 to 8, because of its so-called difficulty, as I used to say. But I mean, come on. But like, let's not insult skill, but like, on the real flip side, we've got Tails. And this is my best Tails count from one stage so far, actually, because I used Tails 1 time. And it's ironically at the spot that made me stop playing this game when I was younger. Yep. Because it was supposedly too hard, but besides me being required to use Tails to fly, that's about it. The next act is a water level. I don't know why they put a water level in a snow zone, but okay. And we know how water levels go in challenges. I had to replay this stage multiple times. So after a little bit, I was able to get the idea to use Tails for the whole stage. But that idea did pay off, mostly because of that technique. I could easily avoid having to stop using Tails over and over though. Well, scratch the easily part actually, because the Tails' movement in swimming is compared to Sonic's walking, but the controls are kind of stiff honestly, because Tails actually swims. I'd say it's a problem since it really does go unnoticeable most of the time, unless you're writing a script, like me. But the parts that have these robot fishes, yeah, that's what I'm gonna call them, that spread out big areas of ice, they can get very annoying because if you happen to swim into them while they're getting froze, that'll stop you from using Tails. And you're gonna lose ranks, so that's a bad day. But while they're already frozen, it's really not a problem. But even with my method of keeping Tails on the whole time, I still had to take off Tails at some point. The water will eventually rise and lower, which makes me stop using Tails while out of the water, because Tails on the land is temporary. So for half the stage, Tails is only used once. But long story short, I only had to use Tails 4 times. So the Tails count is currently at 3. So let's move on to the boss now. I hate to be anticlimactic, but this stage doesn't require Tails at all. Well, yeah, I'm sure you're intended to use Tails because Metal Sonic destroys parts of the ground. So Tails was being used once by flying, but it's not really insanely hard. Surprised I'm saying that about Sonic 4 too, so it is possible. So the Tails count stays the same. So let's move on. Oil Desert's next. We're starting out this zone with 13 times required to use Tails. This is personally my favorite zone in the game, so far at least, and I'm personally not sure, but when I was recording footage, it didn't save 97% of the first act's actual footage, but that doesn't matter in fact, because it's making my editing easier, because the section on the screen is the only part where I needed to use Tails in Act 1, because there's this little bit of land, and well, Sonic's no good for that, and that's when Tails comes in handy. Yay. Alright, so for though, you have to use Tails over and over and over again, which by over and over and over again, I mean 3 times. So the Tails count is at 16 right now. So let's continue. And Act 2 was absolutely perfect. The best stage so far. Tails isn't used a single time the whole stage. God bless Act 2, bro. But Act 3. I'm not even counting Tails with that. The stage just such bold. I mean, like, I really like this stage, but God, this crap is hard. But to my maximum surprise, Act 3 doesn't require Tails at all. The boss of this zone uses Tails 2 times. One time to fly into the air for the second phase, and the second phase, you need to use an Ultra Spin Dash to hit Eggman's, I guess, robot foot. The foot of the robot, I don't know. This zone was very nice to me actually, because no other zone so far has been nice to me in this challenge. So the Tails count is currently at 18, so let's move on to Sky Fortress. The first act's a plane level, and the only way you can use Tails is for him to spin around the plane, so I'm just going to count that for using Tails. So let's get straight to the point. Okay, so straight to the point, you have to use Tails 7 times. Now the Tails count is 25. Sky Fortress, why? Why? Dude, Oil Desert was so nice to me. Why? Why? The first stage already sucks balls. Come on. Why are you being against me, bro? Okay, well, crying's not gonna help, so let's continue on. Act 2 does go back to the side scrolling, which means Tails should be used less because the gimmick should be slowing down, I think, at least. Tails is used 2 times for flying up in the air to get a higher surface to continue. And very shortly after that, you have to fly to avoid these flames. There's really no point in attempting to avoid using Tails here. It's obviously too high for you to run up as Sonic, and it's not a slope. Act 3 took an insanely long time to finish because I kept dying and losing my lives. I was so close to dying on my winning attempt. I only had 1 life left, and then I was dead. But don't you dare think that this stage was nice to me with the use of Tails. This stage beat me down. It took me 7 times, just like Sky Fortress Act 1. So now the Tails count is 34. The first instance where I had used Tails pulls the Oil Desert on me. It's that segment where it's the pit of death, and you've got to use Tails to fly. Very shortly after that, there was basically the same thing, but you don't have to do it once. Then the next 2 was just Tails flying in the air for a short amount of time. Then the final one was using an ultra spin dash to get to the end of the stage. The boss of this zone honestly is very easy in terms of avoiding using Tails, but you can't avoid using Tails for the final hit with Tails because he is used once for the final hit because you have to spin. So let's continue on with the final zone, the Death Egg. There's only 2 acts in the zone, so let's start with another fight with Metal Sonic. There's not much instances where Tails is used for real, which is great. But there is one instance though. These 2 stages mess around with gravity a lot, so the stage will change the direction from up, down, left, and right lots of times. And one of these instances forced me to use Tails. Edit, okay, so after playing this stage, you take a different route. I found that you don't need to use Tails. So that saved 1 use of them. So our Tails count is currently still at 34. There was a few other instances where I had to use Tails, like literally immediately after the part I just talked about, and these 2 other parts where you're meant to fly. So the Tails count is now at 37. So now let's talk about the final boss. And god dang, is this boss hard AF! So the total count for this boss is 4. The first time you have to use Tails is on near the last phase. You have to use Tails to fly up into the air because the other platforms aren't close enough, and even if you wait, they're not going to come close enough. And I'm not really sure, but I think on this phase, you're timed. Because for this phase, if you don't get to Eggman fast enough, you're going to die and he's going to take you. So you have to do it quickly, so yes, Tails is your best option. The next time is an Ultra Spin Dash to destroy the force field around Eggman. Then the next 2 are basically the same thing as the last 2. And with that said, the Death Egg is done. So what's the least amount of times required to use Tails in Sonic 4 Episode 2? Our total is 41. I honestly think that score is okay. Not great, it's not bad, and it's not good. Also, if you guys ever end up playing Sonic 4 and you do this challenge, let me know if there's any times where you can avoid using Tails that I didn't. And with that said, peace and watch the video that's about to be on screen.